Hey, welcome to the Gravity Doctors. I'm Dr. Brendan Spiegel. I'm a professor of medicine and public health and a gastroenterologist. And I'm the author of the book Pull: How Gravity Shapes Your Body, Steadies the Mind, and Guides Our Health.
And I'm Dr. Lachlan Kent. I'm a psychology PhD, and I research the idea of mental gravity, the connection between gravity, the mind, and in particular, mental health.
And between the two of us, we're the Gravity Doctors, focusing on how this fundamental force of physics that's always been around, as far as we know will always be around, affects our mind and our body and our health.
And today we're talking about, Brennan, your forthcoming book, your upcoming book called Pull, which is due out for release in early October. So this is sort of where we connected. Again, we started emailing when we both realized we were thinking about the same ideas about health and gravity. And in sort of the 2 years that I've known you, while I've been faffing around and doing pretty much nothing, you've written a book. Tell us about it.
I did, yeah. I wrote a book called Pull, and this book is really meant to tell the story of what we call biogravitational medicine, the kind of technical term, which is understanding how physics came first, and then biology came second. And then psychology emerges from that. And really, it's a through line between those three different disciplines. It really began with a personal story. My mother-in-law had developed some cognitive decline, and she was in an assisted living facility. And she was spending a lot of time lying flat in bed. And this happens a lot in nursing homes and hospitals. And, you know, we're not really designed to lie flat like that. And in her case, she started to develop some stomach issues, bloating, became constipated.
And you're a gastroenterologist, so
Right. So my family asked me, what do you think's going on? And I started wondering because she hadn't changed her diet really. She hadn't changed any new medications, but it seemed to have started almost in lockstep with this change in her posture. And I started thinking about, well, what happens when we lie flat? Well, normally at night, we lie flat and our gut goes to sleep when we sleep. But it wakes up when we wake up. And we're designed to stand up. And the gut is like, you know, in a previous discussion, we talked about a sack of potatoes that's sort of suspended. And I think of it like a functional stack. It needs to suspend in order to work. But if it's always flattened against itself, kind of pancaked upon itself, then the intestines don't work well. And we see this a lot in the hospital where people get something called ileus, which is a bowel paralysis. So anyway, it got me thinking a lot about our relationship to gravity. And I ended up writing a paper about this called Gravity and the Gut. That got surprisingly worldwide attention. Then I realized, well, you know, it's not just about the gut, as much as I like to think everything's about the gut, because I'm a GI doctor. The entire body is managing gravity.
Yeah.
And that led to this book that I wrote.
So it's basically extrapolating the principle in GI that the food has to start at the top, go around effectively a spiral and down and out the literal bottom.
Right.
So you're thinking, okay, when that process is disrupted, you start getting signs of disorder and disease, and it's like a decoherence that's not, the body's not working the way that it should. And that's where we connected, wasn't it? It was like, well, there are ways that the brain and emotions don't work the way that they should, that the self doesn't feel at home in the world, like it's not oriented properly. And in your paper, Gravity in the Gut, you used the term mental gravity to explain the association between IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and symptoms of mental ill health like anxiety and depression. And that pinged a Google alert. I've been on the lookout because I was developing this concept myself. I'd been using that term and I was wondering, are there other people out there thinking in this way about a fundamental force in physics and its mental sort of counterpart, the idea that we want and need to be upright, because in sort of parallel to your mother-in-law, when you're upright, you can do more. When you're lying down, that's effectively when we're passive and doing nothing or very little. So if you can't get up, you're either very sick, unconscious, or dead. So there's like a intrinsic value, especially for humans, in being able to get up. And that's effectively what your book is all about, isn't it? It's
It really is, yeah.
the physical and the mental connection to to a fundamental force.
Absolutely. And, I hadn't read any of your work either at the time I was writing my paper. And to have learned about your thoughts and ideas in this sphere, and many others as well who have been just thinking generally about
Mm.
this relationship we have to gravity, which almost seems so simple and obvious, it's hardly worth mentioning, except it's it's vital
Yeah.
to our well-being.
Yeah.
And in writing the book, I realized not only are the two of us thinking about this, but there's been hundreds, really thousands of papers written in some way, shape, or form about this relationship. And it never had been woven into a single narrative
Mm.
before. So I thought, boy, there's a real story to be told here, a story that is important to all of us who happen to experience the force of gravity. And by the way, it's also important to people who don't experience the force of gravity, like astronauts in microgravity orbit.
Yeah.
So I realized we can learn a lot from NASA and from space agencies who have been exploring the opposite effect of not having gravity. And then I realized there's kind of like a Goldilocks zone,
Yeah.
too much gravity in relation to our capacity, not good. Too little gravity, not good. We need to find for each of us that special zone where we're in alignment with gravity, both mind and body. And that's really what the book explores.
Isn't it? And then there's the idea of, balancing out. That's a gravitational metaphor. We want to be in balance or in harmony with ourselves and the world. So there's all of these concepts that are sort of floating around in language that people like linguists research this. There are perception scientists who look at graviception, the idea that we take the sensation of verticality. We've got an inner ear that's detecting balance and rotation and orientation, proprioception, so where your body is in space, the gut as well, as you've said, it's like a G-force accelerometer. There are all these signals coming throughout the body that need to be kind of added up and sort of made a holistic picture of what's happening with the body with respect to gravity, which we call graviception. But then that's just the perception. What about how we respond? What about the behavioral repertoires, the ways that we manage, the complex long-term ways that we manage it? That's all up in the brain. So while we're going to be talking a lot about pumps and tubes and gut issues and your spine, the brain is that part that sort of is managing it all at a high level.
Yeah, that's how I organize the book.
Mm-hmm.
And in the introduction, I go through the different ways that we manage gravity, and they all eventually get to the brain,
Yeah.
the central command center in essence. And so, one of the ways that we manage gravity that I talk about in the book is our musculoskeletal system. This is our primary anti-gravity organ. We need to have muscles and strength and bones to articulate our body up against the force of gravity. And within that is suspended all these like ornaments on a Christmas tree, I guess, like all of our viscera dangling down, the heart and the lungs and the abdominal contents, the pelvis, all of that stuff is dangling inside. And that's when we get to the pumps and tubes, which we've also talked a bit about in another one of these conversations. And so that's the second way that we manage gravity is through these hydraulics, the pushing and pumping of fluid within the body. The third way you mentioned earlier is the inner ear. So up in our brain and our inner ear, we have the vestibular system, which is constantly keeping track of your alignment, physical alignment, and acceleration. But what I really came to realize in writing the book is a vestibular system is more than just a gyroscope. I think of it like mind-body glue. It kind of grounds us in our physical body, and things go wrong if that inner ear goes wrong. For example, I tell the story in the book about how I personally have had some inner ear issues. I got knocked in the head once as a kid, and one thing that happened is it knocked loose some crystals in my inner ear. And it turns out these things float around a little bit and throw off my relationship to gravity, cause dizziness and vertigo. And for some people, they can feel out-of-body experiences, anxiety, panic attacks, and it brings us right back to mental gravity, which is really your area.
So for sure, like people, the connection between physical and mental, when people are in the state of panic, that can cause a literal collapse of the body. And that's not just hyperventilating and getting lightheaded and passing out. There's a two-way communication between the physical and mental where they're shaping each other. They're in dialogue. Yeah, we're talking about sort of external sources of gravity that we've got to manage with our muscles and bones and tendons and the internal G-forces, but there's a point of connection in between. I mean, we've just, in the last 10 or 15 years, discovered the interstitium, which is another organ that's sort of threading everything together. That's all the viscera that are hanging down are sort of suspended in this mesh. And in that mesh is where everything from the external to the internal meets and communicates and is connected and integrated. And when those integrations break down, and the vestibular system, we know it's not just about posture or balance or gait, it's about selfhood. The whole body being grounded in, or the whole self being grounded within the body. And if that glue is lost, you dissociate, you don't feel like yourself. And it's these kind of illusions, even though, there's philosophical arguments that the self is an illusion that we project onto the body. When we lose that illusion, the mental health impacts of that can be quite severe. So we talked about in the last episode about depression as an illusion that the brain is tricking you that gravity is stronger than it actually is. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about is this two-way physical and mental communication that are actually not separate. There's like a continuum. They're actually connected in the middle somehow.
Right. And so this is a big theme of the book, is this physical mental continuum in relationship to alignment with gravity. And the vestibular system is right in the middle because it's very much a physical thing. You have these tubes. Here's more pumps and tubes. We got tubes in the inner ear and fluid sloshing about. And it seems very, very physical. But yet your sense of self can be violated if those tubes aren't working correctly in the middle of your ear, if it's not keeping track of your relationship to gravity and the pull vertically across your body. And so there's a whole section of the book dedicated to that, and I'm sure we'll be exploring some of these ideas. And then there are a couple other areas of gravity management that I focus on, and of course I always come back to the gut. So a whole discussion about the microbiome and serotonin production and how that helps us fight gravity. Cover that in the book. And then also altitude management. This is another way that we manage gravity. When we're close to the ground, gravity's grip on the atmosphere is tighter. It's like a blanket that has settled close to the ground, and we feel a certain pressure. As we rise in altitude, gravity's grip loosens and the atmosphere becomes thinner. And we have all sorts of ways of managing that too, or mismanaging that if we're not careful. What happens when you go up in a plane, for example, and get something called jet belly? What about astronauts in outer space who are even higher up and having all sorts of issues? So that's yet another component of understanding biogravitational medicine.
And it really goes down, like you were saying, to that subcellular level, doesn't it? We're not just talking about, organs and muscles and tendons that you can see, but at the subcellular level, there are these things called piezo channels. So there's a Nobel laureate here in California who've discovered these piezo channels that takes a physical stimulus of gravity, the movement, the pressure, and the sort of shear forces, and translates it or transduces it into a neural signal, into an information that the body can use. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so I hadn't heard much about these until there was a lecture about them at my medical center. And as I'm listening, I realized, wow, these channels, these piezo channels, are kind of like the baton handoff between gravity and electromagnetism, right? These are two of the four known fundamental forces of physics, and really the two that we manage all day long. Mainly electromagnetism and gravity. And gravity has all sorts of physical impacts on our body. Our relation when we fall out of alignment with gravity, there's stretch, there's pull, there's pressure, and then our nervous system detects those changes. But the piezo channels in particular detect the physical shifts in the body, and then they translate it into bioelectric signals. And those bioelectric signals then are essentially encoding our world. We're taking the data from our world, in particular our relationship to gravity, and it's informing us with just a river of data what's happening. But then it's up to our nervous system to prune away the unnecessary information and to compress the data in ever more tighter forms like a computer does. So by the time it reaches up into the brain, the ultimate data compression engine it has now compressed all of that information into a narrative that makes sense so that we know how to behave in relationship to gravity to survive and thrive.
And that narrative is so key, isn't it? That's when we get the idea, I think, in health about stress, physical and mental stress. And if you think about the metaphor for stress, you can take any material and you can
Mm,
apply forces to it.
right.
And that's stressing that material. That's stress and strain if you go too far, and you can even break that material.
Mm,
So from the tiniest little stimuli, gravitational stimuli, you sum all of those up to the brain that's getting a holistic picture, and that's that's the emotional connection. There's this narrative, the story of stress and strain that we feel in our first episode in terms of gut feelings. It's not something we can say, I've got a pain in my knee. It's I've got a feeling in my body that's either positive or negative. It's got some valence to it. And to me, that's where the idea of up is better than down in general, or these are states of alignment and balance. There are ways of describing health in gravitational terms because of these very fundamental forces of stress and strain and load. And we have a technical term for it in psychology or in health of allostatic
mm,
load.
mhm.
Homeostasis is what's happening in your body right now, and there's a homeostatic load on your body. But in that narrative, whole body sense for the long term, we call that allostatic load. There's too much load, you get stress. If there's not enough, like you were saying, not enough gravity, then you get problems as well. But too much you become overloaded.
So that analogy helps us think about the practical implications of all of this.
Mm,
So in the book, I talk about this notion of gravity resilience. So just like, a tree can bend in the wind, but ideally not break, or even well-engineered buildings can sway a little bit if they're very tall, but not break. Our body needs to be able to bend, but not break
mm,
under the force of gravity.
yeah.
And in the book, I talk about what are the components of becoming resilient to gravity. Part of it is just your fortitude, your physical strength,
Mm.
and the strength of your muscles and your bones, your ability to stand up and stay up, right?
And the stretchiness, like we were talking about
Yeah.
before, not too stretchy, but not stretchy enough.
Right. And there's a term for this. It's called tensegrity,
Mm,
which is a really interesting term that combines uh, integrity with tensile. So basically, what it's all about is you want to have the ability to, bend but not break. And within the body, all of the organs are connected to each other and to the bones and muscles through that interstitium that you described earlier. You mentioned it was a new organ. How do you find a new organ? We've been looking at the human body for centuries. Actually, it is always there, but we didn't realize its functions until recently. And one of its functions is to tack us together, but to give some almost like lubrication in the body
mm,
so that we're not so stiff that we can, easily break, but not so loose that we fall apart.
mm,
And that's part of what the interstitium does. But what I was getting at is this idea of gravity resilience has really three parts to it. The first is the fortitude, which we've been talking about, the strength, the tensegrity, the pumps and tubes. The second is your sensation of gravity.
mm.
How as we talked about before, the piezo channels convert, gravity into bioelectric signals. And the third is your area, which is mental gravity. And in the book, I talk about how do you determine which of those three areas needs to be worked on for you?
Mm.
What is your gravitype? And among various gravitypes, and I talk about 8 of them in the book, what then, of course, do you do about it?
Mm.
We're talking a little bit theoretically here. Well, what do you do about it? And the book has a whole section on exercises and activities and a lot of the therapies that we'll be talking about in this podcast.
And none of what we've proposed yet is novel in terms of the therapeutics. It's all about interpreting what we do already under a common umbrella and
Mm.
saying, well, that has this effect on gravity, that has this effect on gravity, to give all of those interventions a common language. But that's not to say that through this approach, there aren't going to be innovations in treatment that we're not going to be able to research. We're both researchers. We can do basic research and look at biogravitational medicine as a window into new techniques.
Well, it's interesting because I've heard not many people, but a few people have said, "Oh, well, what's novel about that? Of course, gravity affects the human body, right?" I say, "Okay, well, if everyone seems to know that, then why do very few doctors ever prescribe vagus nerve stimulation? Why do very few know about or prescribe flotation tank therapy,
Hmm.
or tilt table therapy, or inverted yoga positions, or hypopressive exercises, or diets that can boost serotonin, which can help with gravity management?" These are all just examples in the
Yep.
book. And the fact is, very few doctors actually think this way. And so, although it may seem obvious, it's rather inobvious in that modern medicine very rarely follows this sort of holistic approach.
It's a problem of emphasis, isn't it? There's been a mirror image problem in psychology and psychiatry where there's been an over-reliance, in my opinion, on electromagnetism, on the medications. It's like, well, we've got to get your chemical balance right. Psychological disorders are a chemical imbalance. We've kind of disproven that fact that there's embodied, traumatic, all these different causes and factors that determine someone's mental health. So what we're saying, there's been an underemphasis and there's been a lack of attention paid to gravity itself as a primary cause, in addition to electromagnetism. Not on its own. It doesn't explain everything. This is the number one caveat that will keep coming up. It doesn't explain everything, but it might be underneath all phenomena in some way.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah,
It's the Earth.
it's right under our nose.
We
Yeah.
emerged from the Earth.
Yep.
Okay, we are a product of it, just like everything else on this planet, and it's on it.
It's a product of gravity, by the way, but yeah, keep going.
It's a product of gravity, right? And, gravity is, as I said before, a fundamental force, was here long before the Earth was. The Earth was a result of gravity bringing material together. At some point, material gets so close together that, electromagnetic bonds can start to form and hinge it together and form it even at a different level. And we emerged from that process.
Yeah.
We are a product of this planet. Now, some people have thought, oh, the fact that we have back pain and have heart failure and get dizzy, maybe we actually are not of this planet and we're still trying to, adapt to it. That's an interesting way of thinking. I don't know if that's it.
That sounds reversed.
Yeah. I think it's exactly the reverse. I think we're still evolving on this planet. It's not that long ago, evolutionarily speaking, that we stood up. I mean, it's actually pretty amazing that we do as well as we do, particularly in this day and age of sedentary lifestyles, of lying in bed way too long, of not drinking enough fluid, of eating the wrong foods, not getting enough sleep. All of those are, if done right, gravity management techniques.
Yeah.
And that's what the book focuses on that.
And have you seen the sort of joke meme of the ascent of man? Like we're going from ape to hominin to Neanderthal to human, and then we're going back to our phones like this.
Hunched over again.
Yeah, we're hunched over
with
again.
kyphosis, which is that bending of the spine. And it is a fun meme, I guess, but it also says something about gravity.
Yeah.
That our modern behaviors are less aligned with gravity in some ways than our ancestors from just 200 years ago, who were upright and walking around all day and strong and farming and whatever they were up to. They weren't hunched over, glass screens typing into the void.
Yeah. Because you think, I say this a lot, the ascent, when we stood up, that allowed us to do more. It freed up our hands. Like there's a freedom in being able to be up. It allows you to do complex behaviors that we couldn't do on all fours. You can't do lying down. It's a necessary state of well-being. So I think it's bringing this emphasis back. Maybe it's somehow been lost, the idea that the physical state of the body and the mental state of the mind are connected to a very basic fundamental force.
Absolutely. Well, check it out if you're interested. Poll comes out in October. And by the time people are listening to this, it may already be out. I also recorded the audiobook, which was a lot of fun. And I will say that if down is bad and up is good, writing this book made me feel very good. Made me feel quite high, and that's real high, just writing a book about gravity.
And now you can relax now that it's done.
That's
you can
right.
enjoy the calm relaxation down, a positive down state.
For sure. If you like that episode, please like and subscribe and tell your friends about the Gravity Doctors. You can also follow us on social media. Check out the book Pull, and you can also check out our show notes for tips and links to some of our scientific articles. You can follow us online at thegravitydoctors.com. You can follow me, BrennanSpiegelMD.com, and Dr. Lachlan at lachlankent.au.